worked out that I had not been this far north before, so that was quite a shock to me, but very, very happy to be here. And I'll just say a little bit about myself. So I've been with AN now for 2 months, and previously I was working at Liverpool Biennial. So it was really nice to hear from the Royal Standard this morning, because I know the struggle that they've been through, but also what a great success that building is and as an organisation, and how much help they gave Liverpool Biennial. And I think the one thing that may have not come out of this morning's presentations is actually institutions that are bigger in the city do rely on the artist-run spaces, especially when we have artists coming in and visiting Liverpool. Often TRS would give them a studio, welcome them into the city, network them into those artist networks. So that's really important. Some of you may know my name because I used to work for Arts Council England, but that's quite a long time ago. So I'm very happy to be chairing this session, and what we're going to do is do a very short introduction. So this session is called a Network of Outposts. I was very struck by the idea of Dundee being the Galapagos, and, you know, hashtag bucket list, because obviously we wouldn't want to go to the Galapagos. And I really feel that that was a really interesting comparison to make, and it'll be really, I guess, we can only really see the results of this in perhaps a year's time. It'll be interesting to see how things change in the city after the landing of, you know, the V&A in Dundee, and, you know, the positives and what people can take from that, what the artist-run initiatives in the city can gain from it. So I'm going to hand over the microphone, and people will introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their organisation, but also really consider some of the challenges and the opportunities of becoming networked and also working with each other. So I'm going to hand over now, and it's going this way, and this is Alissa Kleist, and she is a curator and works in Northern Ireland in Belfast. So Alissa, if you'd like to introduce yourself and some of the work, and in particular you've worked on quite a lot of collaborative projects, and I know this morning we local authorities came up in a few of the presentations, so it'll be interesting to hear about the collaborative projects that you've worked on.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me. It's really exciting being here for the first time. I'm a Belfast-based curator, and Belfast is a city that I came to 9 years ago this September. It's a place where I originally went to study. I did an MFA at Ulster University, and at the same time as kind of discovering that there was an MFA there that I wanted to do, I also heard about Catalyst Arts, which came up earlier in the presentations. It's Belfast's own artist-led space, and so those two things always ran alongside each other for me. This idea of pursuing an artistic practice, and also of being part of a kind of artist-led space. And I did 2 years of an MFA and began to work pretty much right away in Catalyst after that. And that's also it was a very formative time for me in terms of making me realise that maybe my career trajectory was not about being an artist, but it was actually about working as a curator, but very much in a kind of collaborative, kind of collective context. And it was actually at Catalyst that I met kind of the people that make Belfast Belfast. I discovered so much about its history, about the importance of this organisation, which has been running for 25 years. Again, it was that kind of traditional model of 2 years voluntary led, and this kind of idea of kind of putting your life and soul into something that eventually, you know, chews you up and spits you back out. So I had a real baptism of fire, and it's also the place where I met two of the people that I still work with today. So Owen Dara, who's of course here in Dundee at DCA, and Kim McAleese, who works at Grand Union in Birmingham. And kind of through being at Catalyst, I kind of got to know the city, like got to know it in a way that you can't get to know it when you're just a student. And I really started to kind of get into the kind of grassroots-led activity there. And I went on to work with Owen Kim and Sheila Branakasha and Kira Hickey to kind of set up this organisation, which we now are called Household. That began initially through organising a festival in 2012 called Household Festival in Domestic Spaces in South Belfast. It initially included an invitation to people, artists that we knew that kind of lived around us, who we were really interested in and who were doing really interesting, exciting things. And we kind of decided to formalise that and turn it into a festival, and that grew into 35 homes and about 80 participants in the first year, and over 50 homes and spaces in the second year, and over 120 participants. And so we've continued to work together, taking some of the ethos of working in this collective way. So there's 5 of us. We run, a kind of democratic system, and we each have equal say over how the organisation is run, and decided to kind of adopt this model into a kind of future way of working. And that has included working across the city in disused spaces and animating those through artist residencies. It's involved collaborations with various organisations, including Belfast City Council. And I think it's really interesting when you're looking at city regeneration, and whether that word really means regeneration or whether it means gentrification, and to also be working very closely with City Council. And so I think that our city faces many challenges currently. Of course, we are on the periphery. We're also now finding ourselves on the periphery of Europe and in the Brexit. And I hate to bring up that word. I don't know if it's really been said today yet, the B word, but of course, sorry. But basically, there's a kind of uncertain future facing us in terms of just we don't know what the situation will look like on the ground by this time next year. And also just this idea of working in, and I hate to use this term in relation to Belfast, but working in a kind of post-conflict context, and this idea of a city wanting to move on from its very, very, recent past. It hasn't been that long that there was essentially civil war in Belfast and very recent conflict, and wanting to somehow reimagine the city and using artists and arts organisations to somehow project the new Belfast over the old Belfasts, because there's many different Belfasts and there's many things that exist outside the kind of grand narrative about this place, and at the same time having this completely thriving tourism industry that's based around Titanic and Troubles tourism and people who come there for their spectacular histories, and our entire political system, which we don't have a government right now. We're coming up to 2 years of not having a government. I think that's currently a world record, maybe. I know that within Europe, we recently surpassed Belgium for the longest, kind of non-government period. And basically, this means that we're at a kind of weird stasis, and so our systems are currently being administered by the Secretary of State and a series of administrators and clerks. And but at the same time, the DUPs in Westminster, they're making decisions or obstructions, on behalf of Northern Ireland. And so in this kind of absence of government, of kind of leadership from within the kind of political system, City Council has been given, it's been given more authorization and kind of more powers over the last few years, so they have more of a say in how the city is developing, and they're kind of just continuing on ahead, but at the same time, there's speculation, as there is in any city. So our city centre has a lot of empty space, and it has a lot of empty space that's privately owned by developers who are just basically sitting on it and waiting to see what will happen. So that provides a kind of interesting set of, it means there's stasis, but it also provides interesting enough space, physical space, in which artists can organise and can initiate new things. and organisations such as us can kind of operate, and we're currently working in a neighbourhood called Sailortown in the dock area, which is kind of at the centre of all this activity. And but at the same time, it also means that whatever artists organise within the city is only very short term, depending on how long a particular landlord might find it useful to have artists in situ. So I don't know whether I'm hogging the microphone now.
I think that was a very interesting comment about sitting on property, because that was the Liverpool situation for quite some time. I'm actually from Bury, which is just north of Manchester, and that happened as well in Manchester. Waiting, people waiting for that moment when that property becomes more valuable. So I'm going to move on to Beth Emily Richards. Many of you may know Beth through her very big arts festival Jamboree, artists run for artists, and AM partnered with Jamboree this year. But you've also been involved in other artist-run initiatives and artist-led projects. And if you could talk to us a little bit about those. And in particular, it would be interesting to hear about Jamboree and how you're creating online an archive, but also a network of artists through that project.
Thank you. Hi, so my name is Beth Emily Richards, and I'm based in Plymouth, which definitely has never been compared to Galapagos. We're very much out on a limb, and I think this is one of the reasons why the Jamboree project came about. So it's actually the brainchild of an artist duo called Low Profile, who are also based in Plymouth. That's Rachel Dobbs and Hannah Rose. And the first iteration of Jamboree happened in 2015 with just 15 participants. AN also supported that iteration, as well as being supported by Plymouth Arts Centre. And it really was an opportunity to invite kind of geographically dispersed artists together to share practice as a kind of professional development opportunity, and although I hate the phrase networking opportunity, it was a networking opportunity. And seeing the results of just bringing those 15 artists together, seeing the kind of new collaborations, the new exhibition opportunities that came from that kind of spurred Hannah and Rachel on to think about upscaling Jamboree in a very large way. So in 2018, we ran Artist Jamboree on the Dartington estate, which was the former home of Dartington College of Arts, which sadly is no more, and brought together 150 artists and curators to create a participant-led programme. And probably it's better that I show you a video, which will probably be a bit more succinct than I can be, and hopefully give you a bit of a flavour of the event. We got tech support.
Do you want to, you're in charge of the audio level though.
This is a space for career artists, and you've worked very closely with Aberdeen City Council, with Bathgate, etc. And I was really interested as well in your connections around working with 3/8.
Mm-hmm.
In Latvia.
Yes.
The collective. I think it's interesting. One of the things I didn't say is actually I did used to work in Australia, and when I was working, I was based in Sydney, and when I went up to Darwin and I met artist groups in Darwin, they actually said to me, it's easier for us to work with Indonesia than to work with Sydney, because Indonesia is much nearer. And this struck me as, Aberdeen working with Latvia, actually, in terms of distance and in terms of, space and how easy it is to get to places. Sometimes it is easier to get to places that aren't actually in your own country, and network and work with people that are not actually in your home. And as we know today, people have made some really big journeys to get here today, and we're very grateful for that. So I'll pass over to you.
Hello, I'm Yvette Bathgate, and I'm a co-founder of Tendency Towards, and Mrs. Donald next to me. I'm also a co-founder, and there's 6 of us all together. So we're new graduates. 5 of us graduated in last year, and 1 person graduated this year. So we're really new. to the graduate system. But I guess the time that we studied in Aberdeen, it was a really interesting time because the art gallery actually closed in our first year of uni, so we kind of went through the whole, it's still closed right now. So this was for a big redevelopment. But during that time, there's Peacock Visual Arts, which is maybe the only other art gallery, but they actually lost their gallery space too, and we're kind of finding another gallery space which they have now, which we've been quite involved in through an associates programme. And then there was one other gallery which was council run, and that was also closed down. So we kind of were just in this space where we were at art school but really had no art to see, so we had to travel to see any art, or of course online, which is an amazing tool, especially when you're in a situation like we were. So it came up towards us, it was in our final year that we kind of, or in Jake's third year, that we kind of started to form tendency towards, and it was kind of as a way to create our own inspiration. So because we had no art in the city, we kind of wanted to just be the people to bring art in. So that's kind of how we formed. We have found ourselves constantly changing the last 2 years to what we actually are. So we kind of, maybe right now we're in between arts-led initiative or like curatorial collective, or just collective. We work together also. I'll maybe pass you on to Donald too.
Yeah, so I think the context that I think there was quite a lot of similarities in what's been said around space. So when we started to form in 2016, and we kind of took a year of really heavily researching different artist-led committees and structures. So we worked quite closely with the committee at the time in Generator, as well as Rubaba in Edinburgh and Market Street Gallery in Glasgow, to kind of really scope out the different structures that they used. I think perhaps, as is always the case when you're in fourth year of art school, we were a bit naive about what we wanted to be. So we were like, we're going to get a space and it's going to be amazing. And everyone kept telling us that you're not going to get a space. I don't think you should get a space. It's quite a lot of responsibility. I think the reason we wanted a space is similar in conjunction to when the art gallery closed. Aberdeen went through, I suppose, an oil crisis. Its main industry closed, and alongside that, huge spaces, so massive office blocks completely emptied. Most of Union Street had a lot of the shops, you get kind of like clusters of like 5 empty shop fronts, but again these are all privately owned by developers, kind of sitting, kind of hoping that the oil price will skyrocket again, which we'll see what happens. But I was actually, before I came here today, I found a leaflet that we produced the month before we launched. So we launched our first programme a year ago, in November last year. So I thought it'd be maybe quite nice to read that out. So tendency towards a new non-profit artist-run initiative for Aberdeen, with a programme of events and exhibitions focusing on contemporary visual culture and discourse. So since then we've done, I think, 5 exhibitions and 3 other kind of workshops or events.
More than that, but yeah.
So we exist to nurture, challenge and support both artists and the contemporary art community of Aberdeen. So the finding committee is myself, Yvette, Jessica, Barry and Jake Shepherd, who are both here as well if you want to give a little wave. And we have another member called Paula Buscarita, who is now based in Copenhagen, but she still kind of works with us. She's originally from Latvia as well, which is where the 3-8 connection came from. And Mary Gordon as well. So we all graduated from Gray's School of Art. So we were concerned at a lack of consistent showcasing of emerging experimental artistic talent in the region. So within the context of a post-oil present and future, culminating with a highly re-energised art scene within Aberdeen, Tendency Towards will operate its first full programme across a variety of locations in the city of Aberdeen. This programme will allow the showcasing of creative talent from across Scotland, as well as work by artists from London and Latvia. Our exhibitions will also be complemented by a series of events and discussions that aim to consider the role of artists in the future of the region, with a particular focus on collective creative labour as a means of operating within a challenging funding environment. And then we were primarily supported by Aberdeen City Council, so maybe with a lot of the other organisations that have been here today have been funded primarily by like Arts Council England or Creative Scotland. We actually got rejected by Creative Scotland Open project funding, but we got quite a lot of support from the council. Aberdeen City Council have a separate pot of funding every year that you can go for twice, called the Creative Fund. This year that was a pot of money of £140,000 to support projects based in Aberdeen. That has become a bit more of a tense relationship with that pot of funding, I think, depending on the panel that decides that. Depends on what gets selected. There's quite a different focus on, we are very much focused on bringing artists from outside Aberdeen into the city. I think there's quite a lot of attitude to supporting things happening in artists from Aberdeen within the city. So I think similar to what you were saying earlier with TRS, that the council don't always understand what our structure is, so they can't quite, and again it's a respect thing as well, where they're kind of maybe expect us to kind of work in spaces that are perhaps non-conventional. To date we've worked in 4 spaces in Aberdeen, so we took over an empty cafe for 3 months. That is actually led to a large festival called Look Again. They've received funding to take over 3 spaces on that street off the back of us going into that street. So the landlord has supported them with, I think it was a value of £49,000 of in-kind, so free rent for 3 spaces on that street. And I've lost my train of thought.
That's like compliments.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, we haven't got more than one mic. So yeah, and so just finally, before we look at the video, I wanted Joanna to actually talk. And the reason that we had a really good conversation yesterday, and so of course Joanna can introduce the work that she does here in Dundee, but one of the things that was really interesting for me was Joanna went on this residency, and clearly that was a catalyst for many ideas, and also the way that you want to work, not just within Dundee, but also with fellow artists and arts professionals in the city, and then how you also then create those networks and create contacts outside of those, and what it means to work outside of those major cities or the major markets. And so it would be really great if you could talk a little bit about how that residency was a springboard. And I know you read from the blog this morning, but I'm very interested in the idea of the alternate structures that we were talking about yesterday.
Yeah, so for the last 7 or so years, I've been heavily involved in running Tin Roof, which is an artist-led, I don't know what it is, it's like an organisation, I guess, sort of. But we set out to provide studio spaces and a workshop space, community, and a gallery space in Dundee at a time when there was very little access to those things. When also the majority of graduates were leaving. Sorry, this is kind of background to the residency, so I'll try and make it quick. But just really quickly, we were there for 4 years in our premises on Belfast Street, and then when a major developer came in to use one floor of our building, the council decided that our building wasn't fit for purpose, and that unless we were able to quickly find £100,000, we would have to leave. Meanwhile, the other organisation, the developer, was able to procure almost that amount from the council to develop the building. So that's kind of how Tin Roof
finished in a way, but at the same time we decided that we wanted to keep the structure of the organisation, the sort of legal identity, because we'd worked so hard to get charitable status. And we had a big group of people that were still in Dundee being like, what now? So we decided to set up the Dundee Ceramics Workshop, and we got a little bit of funding from Creative Scotland to do that. And we now run Dundee Ceramics Workshop as a tin roof project, which is very different to what tin roof used to be, but currently provides a workshop space for artists and creatives who use ceramics in their practice. So that's really been my context in Dundee since I graduated, has been trying to help create spaces and opportunities and facilities and community for people, whether or not they're formally trained as an artist, but who want to have space to be creative, to find a community and to have a space to safely have critical responses to their work. And in late 2016 I decided to quit my job and try and be an artist full time, and it was the most difficult thing I've probably ever done. And I was very fortunate to get a residency through the British Council in Trinidad and Tobago, and I was there for 3 months in early 2017. And it was absolutely amazing to kind of go out of Dundee for the first time in a long time, and see a very different context, a city that has been absolutely ravaged by post-colonial bullshit, basically. Like the British left that place an absolute mess. And to see the role of artist-led, community-led initiatives in providing a space where genuine healing through the arts could take place for an entire culture. And to me that was extremely inspiring, knowing that, I can't even start to compare the two places, but knowing that Dundee has its own traumas and its own difficulties and its own neglects. We have 1 in 4 children living in poverty in Dundee, and that's something that I think as artists we absolutely must address. And I think culture and the arts has a responsibility to reflect these things, to reflect the realities of our cities. And that's something that being in Trinidad and Tobago gave me a sort of, I guess, a renewed excitement for, and seeing that, like I read out in the quote this morning, that informal networks can provide something that infrastructure and institutions are able to ignore or neglect. And it's not to say that one is better than the other or one is more important than the other, but to acknowledge the importance of those things, of these informal groups and communities, in providing some of the most needed resource that we do need in our cities. So I suppose, I want to antagonise Dundee. I want to say, can we have more spaces that provide for people like us that are trying to do these things? It's not a matter of asking the council to run an art collective, but it's saying maybe you could support us to do that. And I feel that there's a lot of opportunity there, and it would be great for us to hear from lots of different organisations who do it in different ways, and the struggles that they experience and the opportunities that they've had, so that we can learn together.
So for the scaled up version of Jamboree this year, as I said, we've gone from 15 participants to 150 participants. And it was a camping event on the beautiful Dartington estate. We were really lucky with the weather. It was over the course of 4 days. And there were several different strands to the event. So there was an artist miniatures exhibition, so you could get a kind of very tangible understanding of several different artists' practices. There was a camp shop where artists were invited to bring zines, bookworks, other kind of small items for sale. There were 2020 presentations, which are like Petra Kuchar style presentations, so that was a very good way of quickly getting to know several different artists or curators' practices, so you'd think, oh, I'm really interested in them, I want to go and find them and chat with them over the course of the weekend. There were communal making sessions where artists were invited to lead workshops and create a collaborative piece of work that needed other people to activate them. There were walks and talks, which were kind of like performative lectures that kind of went into different parts of the Dartington grounds. And then finally there were seminars led by invited curators. And yeah, it was a really jam-packed 4 days. And as I say, each strand that invited artists and curators, self-selected invitation, could then pitch to say, I definitely want to do a Pechacucha, I'd like to be a part of the Moving Image programme. So the whole programme was built by the community of artists and curators who participated.
Right, so this is the point now where I can get you to answer maybe some more difficult questions, because that was brilliant to hear about all of your different ways of working. And they are interesting and very different ways of working. And what I'd really like to understand is now some of the challenges in the way that you work and also how you connect. But in terms of thinking about some of those challenges, and especially hearing from the organisations this morning, why do you do it? This is quite hard work. Who's going to go for that first?
So speaking for myself and speaking from what I think Hannah and Rachel would say if they were here, it is kind of Jamboree is partly from a selfish point of view to address the issues that we have as artists who are kind of geographically very out on a limb. And also several people in the Jamboree team have caring responsibilities, we have other work responsibilities, and sometimes we find it difficult to be able to go to X biennial because of time or money reasons. So it was about creating a kind of networking opportunity for us and bringing people down to the southwest. But in order to make that work for artists in other geographically dispersed places, we worked with other artist associate schemes. So we partnered with CG Associates in Manchester, Extra Special People in Birmingham, Warp at G39 in Cardiff, CVAN Northwest, and so they sponsored bursaries places, so to ensure that we had this kind of wide geographical spread. And we also really wanted to make sure that the participants were kind of at different stages of their career, so that it wasn't just all emerging artists, it wasn't just all mid-career artists. I hate all those terms, by the way, but I'm using them as shorthand. So I think sometimes artist-led activity can be really beneficial to the people who are instigating them as well as to the wider community.
Sorry, I just had to get to you.
I would say probably our biggest difficulty is space. It's something that we are constantly kind of coming up against. And as Donald said earlier, we took over this empty cafe. It had been empty for, I think, it kind of changes all the time, depends on who you speak to, but I think 7 years. And we were originally offered that space actually for a year, free of rent, which was amazing. But then, as we said before, the council supports us financially, especially last year. But then when we went to them, it was going to be like so much money for business rates, which is obviously a problem that, we spoke about this morning. So we had to completely decline the space, and then kind of the search started again. We then, through the Peacock Associates programme, managed to kind of bypass business rates on the term of 3-month lease. But we're kind of, that was, that we don't have that space anymore. And there's so much empty space in Aberdeen, especially because of the oil downturn. It's mad, there's just so much empty space, but you cannot get your hands on any of it. It's completely inaccessible to artists. Because you mentioned in the talk earlier with your introduction, like the fact that there was all this empty spaces and landlords would allow you to have this space, but only on like a short-term basis. But this one space is actually the only space we've even managed to get a reply from, or just like support from the council, which has been really difficult just to find space and time. We're all artists. We all work full-time jobs. So yeah, I guess it would be like space and time is probably the biggest challenges. But I think that you kind of just manage to make it happen. You know, even if something falls through, like we just kind of like, then you just work loads and loads of hours, and then it happens in the end. I don't know if you want to expand.
I suppose, like, on the basis of why we did it, it's very similar to your situation, where, like, I think the idea of Dundee being Galapagos, like another way of thinking about Aberdeen is it's like beyond the wall in Game of Thrones. Like, it's just like wildlings up there. And nobody really knows that you can. It's quite freeing in that you can kind of put on whatever you want, and we're particularly lucky that the creative community in Aberdeen is of a scale where we get to work with partners that are quite large in terms of the funding that they receive. So through working with Peacocks, which is a regularly funded organisation from Creative Scotland, we do get access to things. If you talk to them in a particular way, then when we got access to use their galleries, their newer gallery space when it first opened, and then also they put their name on the lease for the second space because they're a charitable organisation that kind of overrides having to pay any tax. But it's kind of back to what you said about like working with like Free 8. You have to be kind of smart about who you want to invite to Aberdeen. And again, with the issues of space, the council recently had a bit of a conversation where you could do this anywhere, you could do this in a bar, and it's to convince people to come from London to Aberdeen, which is quite a long journey and expensive. There's a certain level of space that you need to acquire to make it worth that artist's time. I think it's embedded in a tendency towards that we really want to treat artists with respect, and also and the mission of AM, we really make sure that we pay artists well. We run it completely voluntary, but we kind of do a 50-50 split on our fee and the materials that they'll get for making a show. And I think also we set it up as a way just to kind of get to know artists that we like. So when artists come to work with us, they live with us. So they stay in our flat, we make them meals, we go for dinner. So for a week or 2 weeks, it's quite an intensive relationship with the artists that we work with, and we get to know them really personally, which means we also get quite a good network out of that in the end. So
I'd also like to add that I guess because we're in such a small community, our voice is really heard and listened to, and the support from the other arts organisations, or even just individual people in the community, is so strong. Like we would not exist without the support of the people, the community in Aberdeen, and that takes any form of support. You know, it can be like getting a space, but it can also be advice on how to approach someone. It can be we've had some financial support, like every form of support possible, even just offering to help to invigilate for one day if all of us are working. Or so yeah, I feel like everybody is really passionate about what we do, and they'll kind of do anything to like keep us going and help us out for what we do.
Somebody else want to pick that up as well? Joanna? I mean, I was interested in, yesterday we talked about how by creating alternative structure, you were able then to create a sense of community and, ensuring that artists are staying in Dundee and working as a community.
Yeah, and I think maybe just comment to you, tendency towards, but it was really important for us to try and find ways to maintain and retain a creative community in the city. And I think that's something that's constant, like it's a continuous challenge, like we've not solved that problem. So I suppose I'm interested in the potential of alternative structures to do that. And maybe that's partly what this event is about, is like trying to find some answers to some of those things. And I'm also interested in alternative structures that don't conform to the hierarchies that exist in a lot of the institutions that we have. You know, even the more sort of radical or like alternative institutions, they still seem to, I mean, even through, like we were talking about salaries earlier, and even through like the salary system, you have an imposed hierarchy where certain members of staff are therefore deemed better than others, and there's a sense of subservience if you're a lower paid member of staff. And I think, you know, you can have amazing bosses who manage to not make you feel like that, but you know, there's lots of different difficulties in our institutions that promote some very old ways of thinking. And I'm interested in how, as communities, we can maybe try and create alternatives to that. Do we genuinely have a democratic system? Do we genuinely have a non-hierarchical system that values everyone's voice? I think, they're the things that I'm interested in. I suppose that's why I'm still trying to do it.
So I guess some of the reasons why we've continued, the five of us have continued to work as household over these years, sometimes paid very little, most of the time not paid at all, but always making sure that we pay the artists and the people that we work with as a rule, is just because we're interested in asking questions, first of all, in a city such as Belfast, and there's a real need for those questions to be asked. You know, as the kind of art sector there is kind of suffering a series of annual cuts and has done so over many years, there's less risk-taking from institutions because they're contracting, and so and perhaps it's more difficult in that condition to kind of to maybe ask questions or to maybe try out something new, and so we're not an organisation that has a space. We're kind of nomadic, and we see the city as a series of spaces, either spaces that are already pre-existing or opportunity to create different types of space in which to ask those questions, and different types of frameworks in which to do that. And also one of the other main reasons why is because we're collaborating, and this is really important, and it works in terms of us five as individuals, and there's a dynamic there that is very kind of precious, I think, to all of us, and that and all the time that we've been part of Household, we've all been working in different institutions. So Household is 4 curators and 1 artist and curator, and so we've been working in different institutions in Northern Ireland and now kind of UK wide, but all this time we've been kind of brought back to this kind of a group that we have in which collaboration is at the forefront, and through, you know, people kind of operating along a kind of non-hierarchical system, and we try and extend these notions of collaboration beyond the kind of 5 of us, and to kind of think about how do we collaborate with artists, how do we collaborate with other partners, and we've worked with dozens and dozens of partners and with hundreds of artists over the years, but also with partners in terms of funders, and that's funders from organisations or funders that fund kind of project-based work to kind of core funders like the Arts Council and Belfast City Council, British Council, and so and it's something, and of course collaboration with participants and with audiences, and if you think about true collaboration and the necessary ingredients to make that a reality, then you have to think about that you treat everybody you work with as your equal. And in terms of the challenges that have faced us over the years, it's trying to find the right funder who will fund a structure such as this without having to compromise and adjust and somehow adopt a pre-existing kind of hierarchical, you know, one person is the boss, or, you know, maybe 2 people share that in some occasions, and then you have the pre-existing hierarchy, which we've all been part of within the collective over the years in our other positions. But actually we're a community interest company, so we're not a charity, and that's very deliberate. So we are both the co-directors, creative directors, co-curators, but we're also our board. And of course, this is a constitutional structure that funders do acknowledge and they do fund. However, the Arts Council of Northern Ireland does not fund community interest companies in terms of wages for staff who are also board members. And so that has been part of our struggle to obtain funding over the years, and rather than kind of readjust the organisation and look for somebody to maybe act as director on paper with everybody else within a kind of pre-existing structure, we've kind of stubbornly stuck with our model. So it's our very kind of strengths and the things that we love about working together has also made it more difficult for us to obtain core cost funding, whilst actually project funding has not been difficult to obtain, and there's lots of different grants structures out there, from small pots to bigger pots that we've been able to obtain over the years. And I guess that idea of like questioning and collaborating and how you can apply that to working within neighbourhoods, with residents of the city, with participants of all ages, with intergenerational groups is something that we're currently applying in this neighbourhood that we're working in North Belfast, called Sailortown. And it's an area where we're trying to explore the past of this rich, evocative, kind of maritime seafaring histories, kind of looking at its present condition and then the challenges and opportunities that are facing people that are of that neighbourhood, that want to visit it, that are interested in it, and citizens, and kind of trying to see what ambitious and high quality public art programming can do in a place such as that.
Thank you. This session is about networking the outposts, and I'm really interested in where your networks are. And so, if you can expand on that, and whether you're actually networked with each other and with obviously other organisations in the room.
So I think at the moment, and within Tendency Towards, we're really looking, I think we need that first year to just kind of pilot doing exhibitions, doing shows, seeing how the committee works. And now that we're into the second year of kind of our almost third year of existing, really, but we want now to kind of get the name of Tendency Towards out there. It's something that we've been kind of consciously working on in the past over this summer. So over summer, another Aberdeen project started called Number 8. Alongside them, we commissioned the artist Rose Dykhausen, who was one of the original founders of Pipe Factory Studios in Glasgow, to do a collaborative, like a huge flag banner. And as a kind of thank you for a lot of the support that we got from other artists-run committees in Scotland, that's now been divided into flags, which are being shared with each of the spaces. So they got shipped out yesterday.
That's nice.
So that's just kind of like a little way of token of thank you, but I suppose most of the ways that we network is just an age of our time, and that our biggest tool is Instagram. We kind of, I guess our main audience outside of our physical audience is our Instagram audience, so it was quite interesting. We actually looked at our numbers for that, for like a recent funding application, to realise that your second largest audience is London is quite strange. But I think that's just because we've been quite particular with the artists that we wanted to work with in that first year, that we'd be able to get our name out there a little bit more. And this room at Timber Collective is actually the first place I showed work outside of Aberdeen, which was quite nice. I did a show with another one of the founders, Mary and Paula. Actually, we done a show called MDF at Timber Collective, which was a really weird show, but we timed it quite well because there was an opening at DCA, so we got a lot of traffic because they ran out of drink and we still had some. So yeah, I think we're kind of always looking to now expand that network beyond Aberdeen.
Also generator. We learned, actually, one of like the biggest things that we've learned this year is to take care of ourselves also, because I think you just want to kind of pile it all on, and they recently invited us to do something, and we said yes, but it was at the same time we were writing a funding application and had a show, and it was kind of a crazy time, and they were so understanding, and we kind of carried on this conversation, but we also like met up with them at the beginning to ask about advice. The generator has been really helpful to us, and I think also that geographically we're so close, and I mean I come down to Dundee for like a lot of events. It's only an hour's drive, you know, it's not far, so I guess like, and also the two cities that are not like Edinburgh and Glasgow, so I guess Aberdeen Dundee has like a strong connection there.
I think, like, going back to that point of Dundee and Aberdeen, is we were quite conscious when we set up tendency towards that, and a lot of the mission statements that we do make reference to Aberdeen quite a lot, but we also make reference to the northeast. So Aberdeen is kind of it's almost like an island, and it's surrounded by Aberdeenshire, which is actually where most of the arts organisations closest to us are based, rather than the city. So we've always been quite conscious of wanting, we kind of consider the northeast, which would be Dundee up to kind of like Elgin, sort of, would be like our region that we want to kind of help and kind of.
I'd be interested to hear from how you connect us all through in Belfast.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about network in terms of who that consists of, and for us that would be a kind of network of partners and collaborators. So I guess we've worked with, I think, most of the arts organisations within the city, but also kind of thinking beyond visual arts. You know, right now one of our kind of key partners is Clonmel Housing Association. You know, we've partnered with kind of organisations that focus on architecture or music in the city, or thinking about public space or space in a new way. So Place and I, or Shelter Northern Ireland, you know, in terms of thinking about housing. So it's not just a kind of network of purely kind of visual arts focused partners. I guess in terms of that network, those are organisations. They're also individuals. So of course there's 5 of us on the board, but we also have an advisory panel of people whom we can kind of contact to ask for advice. And that's really, they're not a board, but they're there as a support structure, and so that network is really varied. It includes people like Claire Doherty, who's obviously she founded Situations, and she now is the director of Arnolfini. Ray Cashel from Shelter and I, Agustina Martire, who's a lecturer in architecture at Queen's University in Belfast, Daniel Dewsbury, who's a lecturer in Sweden at the MA in Gothenburg, and I feel like I'm leaving people off, and Rory O'Keefe, who's the curator of Dublin City Council. He oversees the kind of public art commission there. So those are all people who are kind of experts in their different areas of working, and to whom we can kind of reach out to if we need advice or support, and have done so over the years. But also we've invited people from various organisations to come to Belfast, and that's actually something, rather than, it's quite expensive for 5 people to go visit a place, although we have over the years kind of obtained funding from City Council and the Arts Council to do that, and the British Council to visit. So, you know, to go to Liverpool for the biennial, or to visit Clare in Bristol, or, you know, Glasgow for GI. But actually we've brought people through kind of programs that we have organised to the city, and they include Checkpoint Helsinki, Creative Time, obviously Situations, Camille Verskula, who's an artist and an organiser who's based in Rotterdam, who has initiated a really kind of special partnership with the City Council there in kind of activating disused space and creating artist living, working setups. And I guess our idea is that we draw in these people with different experiences and they share their knowledge and experiences with us, and then we at once extend our network, but we can also use that as kind of research to then kind of develop conversations with our city council and kind of decision makers in Belfast, because of course at a time where risks aren't being taken, and if you can show an effective example of something working somewhere else, you may be able to convince those who are kind of in charge of initiating projects to partner with you in the future. So I guess, I don't know if that kind of answers.
Yeah, very much answers it. I'm just going to let Beth have a quick word, and because we are going to have to get some actions out of this and take some questions.
So I kind of already touched on it, but I think creating these partnerships with existing artist associate schemes was really, really important, and AN and also the CVAM network were really helpful in pointing us in the right direction with that. Because in Plymouth it can feel like you're in a bit of a southwest silo. It can be really difficult to kind of reach north of Bristol. So yeah, it took kind of quite a lot of work to set those partnerships up. But that was really, really invaluable for helping us to get this kind of more diverse spread of artists and curators to Jamboree. And that's something that we're looking to expand, because we are going to run Jamboree again in 2020. And you can register your interest on our website. Little plug there.
So before I actually ask each of our panel members to look at actions, so how can they network as been put in the programme, the provocation, as outposts. Just to sum up a couple of things, actually, I thought that was really interesting about you bringing people in, and then also with the Instagram account, and really being very careful around your choices in terms of building up the reputation. And so there are some very interesting strategies here about, I guess, people becoming more aware of your work, which then means that you can stay where you are and not have to, then you can avoid that pull, that massive magnetic pull to where the markets are in the big cities, and the even bigger pull to the huge international global market that exists in London. So that I thought that those were really interesting strategies. And I love the fact that Jamboree was camping. I didn't get to go because I wasn't imposed, but yeah, I think there are these, where you are just obviously together because you're in that situation. But I'd like to throw it open to questions now. Does anybody have any questions for any of the panel members? Do you want to stand up and speak out, please? Or you could come to the front.
I haven't thought it through, but I was just thinking, if you wanted to start something like this, like Assembly Dundee or anything, do you need to have the people around you already where you can bounce on them? Or is there ways that you can kind of seek it out? Sort of if you wanted to do something, and then, because you all seem to you guys are like a group of friends, you have to have that kind of chat one night where you're like, oh yeah, I want to do that as well. Is that a question?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So that's around, how do those people come together to create these amazing initiatives?
I would say, you have to work really closely with the people in under really high stress situations when maybe you haven't gotten much sleep, or you have to work really closely with them, and you have to know that you're going to be okay working in this kind of environment. So it probably, in my opinion, is good to know the people that you're working with beforehand, because you kind of also just knowing how to, you might know their skill sets, and that they're maybe better with communication, someone's better with the practical stuff, someone's better with web design. There's all these areas of kind of understanding your skills, and also understanding your availability, and just being kind to each other, and understanding that if someone has shows coming up and has extra hours at work, allowing them to, not kill themselves by like constantly working to death, and just like having that understanding that you, that you're all under pressure. So I think it would probably be helpful, but that's not necessarily, if people don't jump to minds, then you can just going to openings and things like this, and meeting people, and that it will become apparent if you want to do that who might come to mind with who you would want to set something up with.
I think it's a really good question, and sometimes it can feel like you're the only person that thinks the way that you do, and you're like, where is everyone else? And I'd say you maybe don't necessarily need to have those people around you right now, but they are probably here, and it's a scary thing to do, but it's so rewarding when you can like project your voice a little bit and say who would like to try this or who would like to do this. And I think there's a real courage in that, but I think that's something that I was initially really encouraged by. It wasn't necessarily a group of friends that I knew very well, but I just said like, should we try this? And a few people galvanised around, and we're friends now. But yeah, I think that's okay, just to be brave with an idea and see who comes to it.
I would maybe also add that, like, I thought as much as we were friends, some of us when we set up tendency towards, I would say it was a pretty a good split between knowing people. I think we were lucky at Gray's. It's quite a small art school, so it doesn't really matter what course people were on, that you kind of knew about them anyway. But I think through doing things similar to Timber, we kind of became closer friends through doing that. I think it's really important to find people that you can have an argument with as well to set these things up, because otherwise you're just going to be ranting and screaming into your pillow, and then you'll probably bump this clip. And there's a lot of arguments as well as a lot of really good, amazing moments too.
Yeah, just having the conversations, I would say, having the conversations, and then it will happen. Not naturally, but yeah, kind of naturally. Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to say that the five of us started working initially together because we independently in smaller groups had the same idea, and then found out that other people were thinking about organising something very similar, and instead of kind of feeling territorial about that, we just said, well, why don't we try and organise this thing together? And when we organised the first festival, in no way did we set out to still be working together all these years later. It's just that we discovered through experimenting and through not maybe putting too much pressure on yourself initially to be something, or maybe not at any point actually to be something, but to kind of follow your curiosity, kind of listen to other people, and allow other people to have input too, because the festival became what it did because people got word of our idea and decided that they wanted to be part of it as well. So that idea of just kind of being allowing things to develop organically too, and maybe not putting too much pressure on what they need to be from the outset.
So I think it's really important whether the people you're working with are, long-term friends or people that it's a new collaboration, to be really clear about what your expectations of each other are, and definitely about being kind to each other. And these are the amount of hours I can put in per week, and also doing a kind of skills audit. So again, I think you touched on it about making sure that people who have the expertise in install will take the lead on that. That other person's great at marketing, so just playing to your strengths, and also maybe then having a mentoring buddy system within that. So I'm not great at tech stuff, so maybe you can help me learn. So yeah, thinking about it in terms of a skills exchange could be a good way of going about it.
Hi, we've got another question.
It was in response to the fact when you touched on it, just from what you said there, I noticed a lot of you when you talked about junior networking with it, you seem to focus mainly on other artists, which I understand because it's about the community, it's about also wanting to do this and being a pleasant experience in networks. But it's interesting, one of the things I've noticed as a researcher is how we talked about silos. We're actually social silos between
particularly getting more women into it? And have you thought about that as well? Because I mean, I know it's not as easy as with this cultural differences, but it seems particularly in an outreach place, this is actually what we have in consideration.
Yeah, I mean, I think being able to have networks and connections across different disciplines is one of the only ways we're going to keep surviving as a creative community. And it can be easy to only connect with the people that are maybe on a more similar wavelength to you. I think maybe one of the things that the V&A brings to Dundee, for me as an artist, is being like, okay, how do I engage with design? And that's as much as it might be seen as a similar thing, it is a completely different world. Or how might I engage with, like, tourism? And I mean, that feels like a kind of disgusting thing. But, like, I think if we can have advocates and people within those different sectors that we can speak to honestly and with integrity and say, like, these are the things that we struggle with, or these are our ideas, can you help us translate them for someone else to understand? And yeah, I'm really excited by the possibility of those kind of networks.
With tendency towards, I think, maybe what we've talked about and a lot of what we support is visual arts practices, but I think where we draw a lot of our skills share from, particularly in the past year, when we were invited by Peacocks to become part of this pilot programme called Associates, in which nobody really knew what Associates was. There was 11 of us, and we were kind of all brought together in a print working workshop, but there was an architect, there was two architects, an anthropologist, an independent curator, researcher, very, very disparate practices, and that kind of forced us to work in a way which also, through Peacocks, I think we became much more conscious of the communities that we were working within as well. And so as part of that we did a project called Open, which kind of forcefully opened Peacocks' new gallery space called The Worm, to bring in community spaces. So it was a bit of a mad month where we organised 20 different events, and those covered things from a discussion group on queer digital existence, to architecture in communities with children's playgrounds, food projects. Yeah, so like really, really disparate. And then also that thing that's constantly ends up being a part of conversations in Aberdeen is a lot of conversations with researchers, specifically at the universities, on a post-oil city. How does Aberdeen address that? And I think that going back to why we kind of exist is because there's almost like people want something more than oil to exist in Aberdeen now. I think beforehand, maybe 5 years ago, people were quite happy to let things go the way that they were. There's been quite a flourishing of different projects in Aberdeen, from street art, which become quite huge with depending on your view on street art, but it has become pretty big in Aberdeen, and independent foods projects like the markets that are happening, but always facing that question of how do you change the city, because there's a realisation that that's not going to last for very much longer in the way that it has done for the past 40 years. So everyone kind of faces that. Yeah.
I saw that there was another question and one at the front. Would you like to I think it's going to, I might not see how far I can get this. I feel like a game show though. There's a little bit of white noise in the back. It's not so near at the front. Okay, so much on the back of what was said and also from this morning. First of all, I think I want to just say I'm so in awe of the strength and the persistence and the creativity of so many people that gathered here today. I'm really taken aback. I've recently come in from Berlin. I've been living in Berlin for 8 years, so I'm really I'm a bit blind to what's going on here, but I'm really encouraged. So I think
my question is, who are your advocates? Because I'm hearing all of this, I know other artists are hearing all of this, but there's a lot of talk of the council and obstructions, and I think just generally in our political climate, in the general opinion of the public and the media at large, I'm not hearing the incredible work that is being obviously done on the ground, and who is speaking for all of you.
Who would like to take that?
I guess like the most simple one would be things like today. So this is an incredible opportunity to just connect with people, let people know what we're doing, and also just to get advice on what other people are doing and how we can connect with them. Or so yeah, things like this. But I'm not really sure who else.
I think other artist-led projects helping to amplify other artist-led projects, as well as AM. And I think in Plymouth, not necessarily now talking to the point of Jamboree, but from being an artist in the city, I feel like a lot of practitioners in the city have felt a real change when the artistic director of Plymouth Arts Centre, Ben Borthwick, came in post, because he was so proactive in helping us find opportunities outside of the southwest, and it felt like suddenly we weren't siloed so much. So I think that forging relationships with supported curators who are really invested in your kind of longer term development is being really integrally important for me.
Yeah, I guess I second the importance of events like today. It doesn't happen that often that you get the opportunity to meet so many different people from, just different parts of the UK, and I guess for us, there's some projects and you do them, and there's no, in terms of kind of recognition, sometimes it's just participants and audiences that give feedback that, involves them saying how rewarding an experience was or how important it was for them to attend or participate in it, and at times that's fine. Not every project needs to have the kind of acknowledgement from the media, either local or kind of national media. We have organised events that have had media coverage, and we've been grateful for that. And definitely more of it could happen. Over the years we've kind of talked about exploring this idea of like getting some sort of like media partner, or kind of even if you could collaborate with a newspaper that understood what you're trying to do in a kind of long-term way, rather than creating sound bites or kind of like spectacular news coverage. But I guess that's kind of the paradox of not wanting to create things that are just a spectacle, that get that amazing photo out there and get kind of talked about for half a day or whatever. So I think but definitely I think the hard work of the people that are here today and the organisations that they represent is not acknowledged enough, and more could be done to.
It strikes me though that there is a massive gap in between the point that, as we're seeing now with the coming in, the guys coming in, but coming out of Berlin as well, that a huge amount of money is on our heels coming in because of the work that's done up ahead. But why is there a continuing struggle to fight for the most basic funding? Where is our political voice in all of this?
Oh, did you want to? So to address that and your last question, I think we also need to become better at like tooting our own horns a bit more. So I think often when you're working on artist projects, evaluation can be something that gets put to the bottom of the list, but actually evaluating the impact of projects in a really tangible way can really help strengthen that next funding bid. So for example, at Jamboree we've created We Met a Jamboree badge so that we can kind of track the new collaborations, new opportunities, new exhibitions, new residencies that might have arisen from new connections made at Jamboree, so that we can actually really track geographically what's been happening. So yeah, thinking about different ways to evaluate.
Yeah, just really quickly on the subject of advocates, there's probably a couple of people in the room that deserve a shout out. One is Sandy from Cultural Enterprise Office, and she might have actually already headed up. But yeah, I think there's a few organisations that have been set up specifically to advocate on behalf of and support artists, and Cultural Enterprise Office is one of the places that have a very big impact on artists individually and as groups. And the other is Creative Dundee. I think they amplify the voices of people who maybe struggle to find the energy to do that in the first place. And I think we do need these people who do well at speaking on behalf of us. Like I think tooting our own horn is a good thing, but also sometimes we don't have the energy to toot our own horn, and it's people who can be like, no, I see the value in what you do, and I have the language to speak to the council or to the funding, like the head of the funding body about what you do, and I can describe it in a language that they understand. And actually, Alissa, I think when we were talking on the phone, we talked a bit about you having an advocate that spoke very, like you had a good relationship with someone who was able to speak to the council, and I don't know, is that worth talking about a wee bit? Because I was really inspired by that when we were talking about it before. Really quick.
Question as well. How do we need to do actions?
Yeah, I guess just really quickly, there's somebody who, within council, she's the cultural regeneration manager who we've been having conversations with for years now, and who we've worked with in different ways over the years in terms of them commissioning us to carry out research that then feeds back into policy. And I think that that's really important, and maybe like even in terms of like a kind of action point resulting from this is the kind of languages that we use to talk about the things that we do, and these like shared definitions that we can all agree that what we mean when we use a word like culture or regeneration. So in that sense, obviously some of that advocacy happens at like policy level in terms of written, but also in terms of people championing what you do, and I think it does sometimes just come down to individual champions, like somebody who either gets it, who's interested in it, or with whom you can have a kind of conversation over the years, an understanding of what it is that you both want to achieve, and somehow maybe also try and meet in the middle, because these things are kind of exchanges, and like council have priorities, or funders have priorities, organisations have priorities, artists have priorities, and how can we meet in the middle? But yes, for us it's been really important to have had a champion and a way in to actually start having these conversations about policy, and I think just before Stormont broke down, or I don't know the right term for what happened there, we were kind of interested in also talking to there's nothing that kind of ring fences funding for the arts in Northern Ireland, or like a kind of arts act. And we were getting so frustrated by that together with a few others within the sector, we thought, can we start talking to political parties? So we kind of had a conversation with the Green Party, and, we made kind of inroads into seeing whether we could maybe just have a conversation with different representatives from across the political spectrum, and then, things happened, and that never went any further.
There was one more question, two actually, sorry.
Mine's more an observation and a comment rather than a question. I've been fascinated to hear what you guys are saying, and the way in which you are introducing collaboration and partnership. My personal experience has been that most curators I've been involved with are hypersensitive, extremely temperamental, territorial, even to the extent that they're more so in each of those qualities than the artists. So it's wonderful to hear this.
And one more question? Actually, it's more of a comment. It's more of a comment.
Earlier in the year, we had a get-together with SCAN in Edinburgh, and they brought in people from outside of our industry to talk to us about collaboration. They came from egg, and how they had dealt with the problems they had on egg for the people to have to share together to own property in North, how that came about. Another person from the music industry came in, and again was reminding us that, I find as an artist that there's a lot of competition between artists because we're all fighting for the little bone that's going to come along for us. And so people pick their, as you say, their silos and they stick to the silo. Whereas working together, we have so much more power. But everybody's got egos and everybody is trying to sustain their ego. But we actually, if we don't fight for it, and if we don't fight together, then we wind up not having, we just get run over.
Well, that also feels like a call to action. We did want to round up this session, and I don't want to eat into too much of your tea time, because I'm sure everybody would like a short break. But just to say, what we want to do now is to really think about what are the actions. So I'll just remind you of the session. We said here it's a network of outposts, and really we've talked about the challenges. I think they're very explicit. I probably don't need to round them up. But also let's talk a little bit now about actions for the future, and what does a network look like, a network of outposts. And interestingly, when we were speaking yesterday, I talked, I'm not young, I'm not as young as I used to be, but I was around before the gig economy, and we used to support each other when I was at art school as artists or post-art school as well, going to other people's shows. A lot of the time, you'd find out if somebody was driving, or you would find out if somebody was going to hitch to the show with you. These are very sort of, as I said, pre-gig economy ways of supporting each other, bringing people up the old-fashioned way where you just hope that they were in. That's the only word, that's where their phone was. But I'm really interested in this age of connectivity, hyper-connectivity, where we can be connected at any point to anybody really in the world. What is the action that you would want to take away from this, which is about drawing strength from the fact that you aren't in those big cities and you're not in the big market cities as well? And who are you going to connect with, and how are you going to do it? Who's going first? Oh, and you'll have to be really quick.
So I know Kevin Hunt's made some amazing artist-led Hot 100s, and maybe this already exists, and I don't know, but it would be really great to actually map every single artist-led project in the UK, well and beyond, because you don't know what you don't know. This is my first time in Dundee. It's been great to learn about all the activity that's going on here, but it can be quite difficult to access that information. I'm sure none of you know much about what's going on in Plymouth, but it would be great to amplify that out to the artist community. So yeah, some sort of map.
I just like more of this. But the idea of it maybe roaming, of being in different outposts, never returning to the centre, but this idea of continuing these conversations, inviting new people into the fold, and kind of, the resources to be able to meet with other people face to face, because I think, we do a lot of things online, but there's nothing quite like just being with other people, so.
I suppose we kind of had conversations about this in a much more practical sense, and I think even from hearing from other speakers today, with ISI, you've had multiple different venues. It's having a shared resource about how do you talk to businesses, how do you kind of convince these people that if you don't operate in that economics, that it's worthwhile giving something a risk. Those kind of skills are vital. I think coming towards Brexit as well, there needs to be resources on how do you continue to work with artists in Europe, how are you going to face the potential costs of working visas to bring those artists here, or continue to expand your network out into Europe as well. I think those kind of things are practical things are really necessary. artist-led council. I guess you've got a sort of mini version of that in AN, but
The kind of dance thing we're spoken.
Yeah, I feel like this event was maybe like me being really selfish because it's what I wanted to happen, of like meeting all these people. So yeah, I'd love to see something like this happen again. But also another action for me would be to take some of these points and raise them with our local authority. I think it would be really good to have some kind of way of representing the conversations that we've had, and yeah, that's maybe my takeaway from this, is like, how do I translate some of this and like use it and be like, look how many people were here, this has been a brilliant conversation, how do we use that as leverage for, and how do each of us use that as leverage in the spaces and places that we're trying to operate.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody that's taken part and thank the panel, and it's now tea time.